Yes, guys, it's another episode of the Cannon podcast, and we're here for an impromptu live going in after the major news from Arsenal's new director of football going. It's an education for all of us. We're here to see what has happened, how we can discuss it, and what it means for us moving forward. And so, thank you guys for kind of coming in and going live. Like, I really appreciate it. Matt, hi, it's nice to see you too. It's difficult for all of us trying to contextualize what this could mean. We don't really know the details, and as you say, we don't really want to panic. But I mean, on some level, we sit there and we're fans. We start to ask ourselves questions about what this past summer transfer window might have meant. We start to ask ourselves questions, kind of, what would this mean moving forward? So I'm really appreciative for everybody kind of coming in, and we're going to try to talk through this together. So I think when we start to talk about Edu, right, there's a couple things that we need to talk about. First, let's talk about his time, his reign, what we can expect, and then maybe what we can expect from sporting directors moving forwards. I think one of the biggest things that we talk about when we look at whether or not there could be trouble, whether or not there could be issues within our club and the face of the project moving forward is when there's disagreements. But really, for me, I'm a type of person where I feel as though disagreements are good. You cannot have unilateral agreement on everything. It's absolutely impossible. It's also not a successful business model. You need to have people willing to have tough conversations. You need to have people willing to impose themselves. And I think from a perspective, there's things that Edu did right, but as a baseline, I felt he did the minimal requirement for a sporting director, which really meant you're not really going to cause any issues. You're going to get what the manager wants. You're going to support. You're going to be an excellent ambassador for the club. Um, and beyond that, there was a minimal baseline in which he's achieved those things. However, when you start to kind of go deep in terms of what is it that Edu actually accomplished at Arsenal, I don't know how much of what we had initially been promised actually got delivered. So let's kind of break down some of the goods about what Edu was really able to do. So I think in terms of a good sporting director, one thing that they have to be able to do is be an excellent people person. They're a network contact, right? So from a perspective of maybe a structure, you might have people that are great at negotiating contracts. You might have people that are great at negotiating or finding networks of deals. And then you might have other people that are maybe guiding those negotiations, trying to convince players. And from that front, we know what Mikel Arteta has done in terms of being an excellent man manager in that regard, in terms of convincing players of the project. I think consistently what you've seen, no matter what you feel on target and transfer targets in general, is that I think you've seen players constantly reference the conversations that they've had with Mikel, but specifically with Arsenal as a whole. And Edu's a part of that. The personal touch that he creates in terms of making people feel welcome, the personal touch that he has in terms of, you know, people feeling welcome to a new environment, the way that Edu goes out of his way to make sure that family members are safe and they feel taken care of and they feel the family atmosphere of a club is a personal touch that I think, whilst might be a soft factor, is actually something quite big, especially when we're dealing with people. This is a people led job. And so for me, Edu did brilliant in that regard. He was a great ambassador for the club. He was excellent in terms of being a brilliant face of the club, the first face that you see entering a new place, somebody that you know is kind, that is looking out for your family, somebody that is able to take a more holistic approach to a new environment. And I think Edu did that brilliantly. Always spoke well of the club. Um, I don't think that Edu ever gave us major controversy. And I think even throughout all of this transfer of power, what I've noticed at least is there really hasn't been very many leaks in terms of Edu being perhaps disgruntled. I think with all organizations, you're going to find some level of disagreement, but for the most part, you're going to find salary, ambition, wanting to expand. And from a perspective of the outside looking in, I see that Arsenal has given him a platform to really learn on the job. I think Edu is quite a new sporting director, much in the same way Mikel. We really had a new look boardroom staff that didn't necessarily have what I would call the experience. You know, they were all new players. You know, Edu had really that 1 year at Corinthians in which he had sample of being a sporting director. But beyond that, that we hadn't really seen much of what Edu could offer. And so whatever we saw with Arsenal was really his coming out party into the world of football. And I'd say largely when you have a look at the rebuild with Arsenal, it's been a very successful rebuild. And so there are major positives that we can talk about with what Edu has been able to do. And I think it's really difficult to start to pick signings and things out because we're fans, right? So we go and we look at indirect methods of consumption. So how are we going to evaluate whether or not Edu has done a good job? How are we going to say that Edu signing is an Edu signing and this is a Mikel Arteta signing? So it's really difficult to get all of those orders in duct. But I think for the most part, Edu gave Arsenal a level of stability and a voice that was calming. I think he was definitely somebody that portrayed a level of confidence in his ideas. I think he was somebody that also did a really good job about managing narrative for the most part. I think Edu never shied away from the media. He was always quite open. And I think for the most part, what we found was somebody that, whilst I always never felt he did any kind of challenging or controversy, he was definitely somebody that sat there and kind of was able to give stability in the face of public maybe disagreement. So this is something that I was really happy to see from an Edu perspective. But I can't divorce some of the bad things that I've seen, and there are certainly some bad things. For the most part, I don't feel that Edu ever delivered on his promise of developing a Brazilian network. I think one of the biggest pros that we were led to believe is with his appointment. While we might see a very new sporting director, we'll see an excellent amount of contacts and networking in an area of the market, which was the South American market, that everybody was hopeful we would look to exploit, especially in a football landscape in a post-Brexit world where you're looking at everybody trying to gain an edge over each other. And the idea was that we were going to have a Brazilian or a South American edge. I think we categorically failed, not even had some kind of average performance there. There really was never a scouting network that was developed in South America. There was no real, I would say, scouting network niche developed by Edu, which for me is a major black mark on his tenure at Arsenal. I think we can get into the signings a little bit later, but for the most part, I feel that is one of the biggest black marks is to not develop some form of scouting niche, some form of scouting network. You look towards the youth, for example, with Per Mertesacker, who's got probably an equivalent title and much less responsibility, right? And you have a look at what he's been able to do with the scouting network. We've seen two major scouting network changes under Per Mertesacker. The initial one with Marcel Lucassen, and then a recently led kind of revolution with Lee Heron in terms of what we're sitting there to do with recruiting new youth. And so from the most part, I felt like that was a major black mark on Edu in terms of his ability to really develop a scouting network or a niche. It didn't have to be from a particular country, but I don't think we ever saw any kind of network-based scouting relationship developed or exploited under Edu. So I don't think he's solely responsible of that, but that's certainly a pillar, I would say, as part of a sporting director's job, which we didn't quite see and certainly wasn't delivered on the initial promise that we had felt like we were getting and what we felt like we would get from somebody who was a major contact in Brazilian football. So I think it's a little bit frustrating to see maybe even your Manchester Cities get some of the South American talents that they've been able to acquire. And we got somebody that was man on the ground in that sense that we never really exploited. So that was certainly a frustration for me. And then let's talk about kind of what this would mean in terms of signings. I mean, very difficult to say what could be a Edu signing versus a Mikel signing. But across the entirety of, I would say, his entire tenure, one thing that I think really frustrated me was how close of a relationship he had to agents, particularly Kia Joorabchian. I think most of his get out of jail free card went to agent-led relationships that ultimately meant that we were at the mercy of a lot of agent relationships in the past, and we did a lot of work as a club to really stop that kind of influx, stop that kind of reliance on agents. And Arsenal became somebody which I guess you'd have to probably also credit Edu being a part of the team, but by looking at his sample of players that he's propped up, even in terms of what we've done with Neto, and that's something that I think Arsenal maybe could have improved upon in terms of a sporting director offering some kind of difference to opinions, some kind of difference to the targets that are being targeted. So one of the biggest things there is you need to have somebody that your manager respects. I think you need to have somebody that Mikel feels is on his similar level in terms of a footballing brain or a gravitas. Because one thing that you don't want to do, and where this could be bad for Arsenal, is if we give Mikel Arteta complete authoritarian power. If we give Mikel the idea that, okay, you have the entirety of the keys and no one can question you, and we're getting rid of all questions, that's a problem. But I don't see it as that. I really don't see it as something where we have to worry. I think this is an exciting time for Arsenal. I think you need change in every organization. And one thing that I'm really excited about is I feel that, at least from a sporting director edge, that is one level of the backroom staff Arsenal consistently could have improved upon. I think that when you have a look at it, our selling record over the last 3, 4 years, it's been poor. I think the last summer transfer window was definitely one of the biggest benefits from a selling perspective. But across the tenure, no matter what context you want to apply, I don't think that we've sold well. We haven't generated money as well as we could have. Now, there's context in terms of where we were at, how effective we could have been, how sellable our assets were. But on the whole, I don't think we've done a good enough job about getting value for assets. And so that was definitely something that I think we could have improved on in the sporting director aspect. So there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of things in this kind of world about where it could go. But looking forward, looking in terms of what we need to do with Mikel, what kind of a personality do we need moving forward? I think I would really push back on this idea of recruiting another yes man. We need to recruit somebody that I think has a knowledge of a particular scouting network. I'd love somebody to sit there and maybe be an excellent scout in terms of England, maybe prioritizing South London particularly, and really going into this domestic drive. I think that a lot of our successful signings have come from within the league, understanding what they give us. And so finding somebody that has been an excellent part of the English Premier League game, I think is going to be very important. I think what's going to be very important moving forward is somebody that has the gravitas that Mikel respects. And for as much as I felt that Edu was a great guy, I don't know if I ever got the impression that Edu was somebody that could challenge Mikel, that could say, listen, Mikel, I think what you're doing is wrong. And I think that's a very difficult thing to do when you've got a very successful manager who has a lot of power at a club. But I look back to some of our most respected partnerships in terms of Arsene Wenger and David Dean. The reason those duo had such a very profound impact on the club is because we've got somebody in Arsene Wenger who had a lot of power, but we had somebody in David Dean who Arsene respected wholeheartedly. It was somebody that I think could question Arsene, could make him sit there and think, maybe I need to get out of my head. And so one of the biggest things I think when we're looking for an Edu replacement going forward is we need to have somebody that the manager respects. You look at Michael Edwards and Jurgen Klopp, another modern example in which you've got maybe an all-time manager in some people's eyes who has been very successful, who has had a lot of power at the club. But then Michael Edwards was similarly somebody that had such a brilliant respect in the market, somebody that did so much for Liverpool that Jurgen Klopp respected him. And there was definitely, I think, a level of understanding that these are two elite footballing people that can bounce ideas off each other. So I think that's going to be really important in terms of us moving forward, where we need to find somebody that has some standing in the game. I don't think I would like another new person or a new addition to the background staff. I think I'm open to whoever comes in. I'm obviously not going to say no off the bat, but I do feel we need somebody with experience now, because Mikel is approaching a crossroads in which he's done brilliant to get us to the point of competing. But this club needs to win. And in order to win, you need to have difficult conversations. You can't stay stagnant. You can't stay still. And I don't think Mikel will. But it's very dangerous to give one person complete authoritarian rule and to rely on that. We want to be a self-sustaining club, ultimately. And so for me, it comes down to, it's brilliant. We've got such a brilliant mind in Mikel, but we need somebody that's willing to question him. We need somebody that is willing to make sure that this club can always move forward with the ideas without Mikel. And that's not to say to remove Mikel from any sort of responsibility, but this club needs to make sure that they're doing the right things to back themselves and to protect themselves, that they're not over reliant on somebody moving forward. So I think From that perspective, that's something that is very important to me. And there's one name, of course, I can give you a name that I really liked. I've loved Paul Mitchell. I think I've recently been told that he's taken a new appointment at Newcastle, but I think some of the things that I really like about a Paul Mitchell name, for example, is somebody that's had experience in a rebuild portion, rebuild experience in terms of creating a successful team that competes, but also has had previous experience in the Premier League, has had a game model that I think has a brilliant way for pressing, I think has a brilliant way for physical intensity. He was somebody that had an eye for those kind of things. And moving forward, I think the type of player that Arsenal need to look at are players that are excellent in transition. It's one of our biggest kind of critiques, I would say, as a squad. So I think having somebody that's able to really identify kind of physical prowess is going to be really important. And I think moving forward, one thing that we need to see is we need to also continue some of the stuff that Edu laid from a cultural perspective. I think one of the greatest things that we've had from an Arsenal side is this level of stability in the background staff, and that comes from the culture that Edu creates. So I think we need absolutely to have kind of a people person that's willing to have conversations, that's willing to be open to the fans. One thing maybe that I could maybe suggest as a trait that we look for is somebody willing to have a conversation, because I think there's so many different levels of media that the club can maybe do a better job about explaining their plan, explaining maybe their idea of ambitions moving forward, and not just the typical of what we see that we want to win trophies. I mean, more so, let's let's open ourselves up to more traditional or untraditional forms of media, not just in terms of podcasting and streaming, but having more conversations with fans. I think bridging that gap could be something that I'm looking to see moving forward. So just to kind of recap here, and we'll kind of get to your questions, as I'm interested to hear what all of you have to say. And by the way, guys, thank you so much for joining me. I know this is really impromptu live. I'm a little nervous hosting, but I hope everybody's enjoying the content moving forward. If you do, just make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. And if you do like the content, you can follow us kind of on Patreon as well. So I guess in conclusion, how we're left with this is there's certainly a power vacuum in the club. I don't view this as a bad thing whatsoever. I think that companies need change. Companies and visions need change. I think that for the most part, when we look at Edu, there's a lot of brilliant face of the club ambassadorial roles that we can attribute to him really moving us off the pitch, a level of comfortability that we need to maintain, a level of accessibility as well that we need to maintain, the family values we need to maintain. And those are things that I think Edu did really well. Now, I think personally, one thing that we can look to maybe ask for something new is a new scouting network. I think, and not just in terms of scouts, right? Like, we want to have a niche. We want our sporting director to be the best in the business. So we definitely need somebody that I feel has an understanding of a market that we can exploit, because that's what we need as a big club. And so we definitely need to have somebody, whether that's through a specific network, a specific country, we need to have a reproducible way of finding talent. So that's really important for me. Next, I think that is very important is in terms of the synergy with Mikel. I think he's such a big voice, but we need somebody with gravitas, don't we? I think we need somebody that's able to ask tough questions. So, for example, if Mikel feels that he wants to keep Emile Smith Rowe and we're sitting there bloating a squad that's maybe stopping progression at a certain point, Mikel's allowed to think that way, but we need somebody with gravitas that can sit there and say, listen, Mikel, think of it from this perspective. You may need to think about it from a different way. And having somebody that can pull us out from our own minds is going to be very, very important. So I think that's going to be something that we need to look for moving forward. And then lastly, I would say that accessibility to fans. I think that we need to maybe, this is a new part. I don't really see very many sporting directors have consistent interviews with fans or with major kind of journalist outlets kind of explaining much of their plan, their ambition, and how they see the club and how maybe they see structures moving forward. I know people laugh at it's a different knock from Raul Sanelli, but I think when we got that interview with him, I didn't love the man, but what I loved was the intent about him showing his vision and describing his vision. I think that's very important. I really would like to get to know the next sporting director and have an idea about what he looks like. I feel I've heard from Josh when I need to hear from him. We hear from Mikel brilliantly, consistently. I'd like to hear another three-pronged face that I can attribute some really excellent growth to. And I think I would really like to see his imprint on the club. Whoever the new person is, I would hope has enough power to sit there and actually contribute to this club and contribute in a way that is unique to them. We can't sit there and expect things that we shouldn't be expecting. I think that we should look to see a lot of the benefits in terms of what Edu gave us from a cohesive complement kind of narrative. It wasn't somebody that I think created controversy. I think the new guy absolutely may need to be somebody that can maybe ask those tough questions. Controversy isn't always bad. And so I think as long as it doesn't get to the point in which there's no longer a working relationship, it's actually healthy to disagree. Friction is good. Friction is good for people to grow. And I think that's something that we need to look forward to. I want us to become killers both on and off the pitch. And so what that means is basically out competing for talent. What that means is setting new directives in terms of how we scout, how we become somebody that's a leader in that space. And so I think from that perspective, those are things that I would describe as the new sporting director that I would like to see. But guys, thank you again for everybody joining in. I'd love to take your questions now, and I believe I did have a question, so I'm going to scroll up. We're going to see how we're going to go here, but get your questions in, and I'll try to answer as many as we can as we go forward. So this comes from Blaze. Thanks, Blaze, for your question. So George, a lot of people said that Arteta will have more power, but how he gets so much power as a manager who doesn't have experience like Pep, Klopp, or Wenger. So I don't know necessarily if he'll have more power. I think when I've personally read some of the kind of the articles that were done, especially by Matt Law, it was an opinion piece in which he feels he will have more power. So I don't necessarily know if that's the case. I think in terms of why maybe Mikel got this much power, I mean, you can't underplay what Mikel has done in terms of getting us to a certain level. But I think with Pep, with Klopp, with Wenger, they all had power to a certain level, didn't they? I mean, Wenger had David Dean. Klopp had Michael Edwards. I think Pep has Tiki. I'm never going to pronounce his name right, but Tiki, I think is his name. But he's suddenly left and ironically free. Everybody had their Robin next to it. So even if you've got an incredible manager, I think that you still felt like there was somebody there that could question or at least provide a new voice to that manager. So I don't know about the how he got so much power. I think that Mikel is somebody that people want to follow. But I do think that he's actually proved his worth quite a bit in that sense. So yeah, I really do feel as though how he got his powers may be debated, but it's proof through sample. But I don't think that Mikel should be an authoritarian, and I don't think none of these guys ever were an authoritarian. So yeah, from that perspective, I don't think so. Speaking of Tsiki as well, again, I'm sorry if I'm butchering this pronunciation, but I think that's how you pronounce it. I think so. He definitely is somebody that fits the gravitas. Definitely somebody that I think fits the group. The one thing that I would be worried about is I don't know what the personality of Tsiki's like. I don't really remember too many interviews that I've seen from him. I think obviously Mikel would have a working relationship there. The one thing that I do fear, and I'm just going to be quite honest, is I don't know what his involvement is like with City in terms of how involved he was with all of the allegations that are met there. And I don't know what that consequence looks like with everybody leaving. Is there any retributional context there? I don't know. But I think from the perspective of being experienced, somebody who's led incredibly successful projects in the past, and I think from a perspective of even recruitment, I think the recruitment of City, despite them maybe having a lot of money, has actually been phenomenal. You can't question some of the moves that City have made on a football sense. I question a lot of how they got their money and how they've been able to do things. But from a footballing sense, the way that they recruit is admirable. It's sustainable. And so from that perspective, I get a lot of positive feelings. So I think it could be a good appointment. I would just have to look at what the personality and what that lines up in, and whether or not he's able to work with Mikel, which I don't doubt that he would, it would be more of a case of how involved is he in all the extras with City, and I don't know enough about that, so I couldn't say anything confidently. Um, so yeah, thank you, Plons, for your question about whether Cheeky would fit my criteria or not. I think I'm just going to go also to Discord, guys, because I really appreciate all our Discord members. So we've got some questions on Discord. So thank you very much. The first one is from Franco SKR. Thank you, mate, for your question. How do we rank Edu from 1 to 10 in his tenure? Ooh, that's a really difficult one. I'd love to hear everybody in the comment. Why don't you guys let me know kind of what you would rank Edu from 1 to 10? I feel that I would give him a solid 7. I think he did a good job. I don't think that I look at Edu and see somebody that was exceptional. And the reasons for why I don't think it's exceptional is because, again, I don't see really any niche scouting networks. I didn't really see any reproducible recruitment from him. And so I also didn't see any consistent level of sales across his tenure that made me think that that was generating money. So for me, there was, yeah, I think 7 is fair in terms of maybe he did a good job where he wasn't a negative to the club, but I don't know if I really saw him being an excessive positive to the club either. So for me, he really met the baseline of what a sporting director should be. But again, it was like the minimum level of baseline. So I don't know if I really found an imprint on him off the pitch. So that's probably why I would probably personally give him a 7. But yeah, I think we're seeing somebody a couple 7s from Robbo. I take a strong 4. Okay, yes, average about 5. So yeah, 7. I think most people are kind of sitting there saying average. He did an average job, and that's okay. But if we're looking for giving kind of the next best thing, I agree. I think that we can improve. I think he did good baseline level, but yeah, I think 7 is pretty fair for what he's been given. And then we'll move on in terms of Sparish. So thank you for your question, mate. Saw you both on YouTube, but also in the Discord. So any names for the role, keeping in mind that it won't grant a lot of power with Garlic and Lewis already in place? So, I mean, in terms of specific names, I mentioned Paul Mitchell on the stream. So I don't know, maybe you can kind of go back as terms of why I liked that name. I think in terms of whether or not you're going to get the same power, maybe that's somewhere that we can maybe transition. How do you find a power vacuum here? Well, number one, Tim Lewis is always going to be an important member of the backroom staff because that's the voice of KSE. And so understandably, that's going to have a lot of power. I think Mikel will always have a lot of power on the pitch. He knows what he wants. He knows what he is at ground level. We need to have somebody on equal footing. I think there can never be a hierarchy, and no team works well when there is a power hierarchy. So I think you need to make sure that, along with Garlic, who's now maybe the managing director, I think you need to define certain roles and what works best. We need somebody, again, that Mikel respects. I think somebody that Mikel believes has the gravitas to talk to him on a footballing level, and we need that level of authority, don't we? Yeah, and I think if we don't have that, it's going to be an issue. So that's one thing that I would say. And I think we're going to also jump to Twitter, and I'm going to go back to your lovely YouTube comments as well, because we've had some brilliant stuff there. But I think we had one question from Etienne in terms of, is it time to bring Arsene home? The reason I bring this up is because I actually think one of the best things that Arsenal have done is kept Arsene Wenger at arm's length. And that has been an incredibly difficult thing for me to admit, if I'm being vulnerable on stream with all of you guys, because the way I view Arsene Wenger is I think he's my mentor in terms of what I look to in a footballing sense. As a philosophy, I can't speak more highly of Arsene. But I think what we did as a club, keeping him at arm's length, is the best thing that we have done. And one of the major failings that United has done is keeping Sir Alex Ferguson near the club. And having old voices kind of mean that you have old ways of thinking, doesn't it? And so from my perspective, I think you respect everybody's era. you respect everybody's input, and we need to find somebody that develops their own voice, don't we? Like, I really don't feel that I don't feel that we need somebody that comes in that has already been successful to lay their imprint. I have no problem getting Arson back to the club in terms of having him in a ambassadorial role or having him meet with the community. But as far as on the pitch matters, I really think that we need to keep that separate. I think that if you don't do that, then you run the risk of having old ways of thinking coming back into your club and being left behind. We need to have innovators. We need to have people strong minded, young, with new creative ideas that I think push us to develop new ways of thinking. And that's personally what I would think. But yeah, we'll get back to your YouTube comment. So guys, make sure when you do put a question, just so I can see if you have a Q next to it and a semicolon, that really helps me to kind of pop up. But um, uh, so from logical nonsense, do you think, by the way, I love that name, logical nonsense. That's excellent. Do you think this will make January more difficult to get anything done? Um, Okay. So how will this impact future summer windows? I mean, I think from a summer perspective, it's far enough away. And I think also a perspective of how long this has taken. I think Edu has been negotiating with the Marinakis group for a long time. So I think this isn't a surprise to Arsenal. It might be a surprise to fans, but I don't think it's a surprise to Arsenal whatsoever. So from my perspective, it shouldn't. I think if it does, it actually says worse things about Arsenal. I'll go that far. I mean, I think that when somebody leaves, of course it's going to have an impact. But I think that, as an organization, you should have key performance metrics that are regardless of job position. You as a group define what you think is successful. You as a group define what you feel will make sense, and you move from there. And I think January is a window where you look towards getting not fixing problems that you haven't done. I think when you do that, it means that you've made a mistake. So I think January is a window for me. It's something where we're looking to gain an edge, but it shouldn't be a major piece. You should be looking at one, maybe two signings. And so from that perspective, I think that January isn't an intense window either. It's not one where you're looking for major sales. You've probably made decisions on a lot of your squad. So I don't understand why it should have a major impact on January. And in fact, I would question Arsenal if it did. So yeah, I'd go that far. Um, so we'll have a couple more of your questions. I probably could go for another 8 minutes or so. But yeah, so we'll have one question from Scott Edwards. Thank you for your question, mate. So will the next director need to manage the transition to a multi-club model? Better British talent ID/recruitment, better women's team management, and better high-end European talent acquisition. So I've actually had this debate quite a bit in terms of, what does it look like from a multi-club model? And so I actually don't know if it needs a multi-club model, but I'd like a multi-relationship model. And so what does that mean? I think from me, I would love to see kind of a way forward in which Arsenal develop relationships with clubs like, for example, Ajax. I think that's a brilliant club to develop a relationship with in terms of what we've got with Urian Timber, in terms of what I'd hope we'd look to with Jarell Hato. I think looking towards our relationship with Sturm Graz, where we just sent Mika Brireth, I think developing clubs that you have tight-knit relationships with and making sure that you're tying yourself next to clubs that have great forward-thinking recruitment is better than maybe transitioning to a multi-club model of ownership. I think that gets murky, personally. So it's a little bit maybe of a sideways step to the multi-club model where I don't need ownership, but I need multi-club relationships. And I think that's very important from both a loan perspective in terms of developing your assets, from a perspective of making sure that we've got a way to develop youth in a much better way. Those are things that I think we need. And, some of the things that you mentioned in terms of better British talent ID, I agree with. I kind of talked about earlier in stream. I'd love for us to have a domestic voice, particularly in South London. I think that's important. Use the talent that you're from, for goodness sakes, guys. Not to tell you how you are, but I think the UK is a brilliant talent bed. It's looking at an explosion of talent. Arsenal should be the homegrown benefit of that. That's your own backyard. Why are we looking to South America and other aspects when we're not looking at what's behind us? So yeah, I think I definitely think that's important. I think in terms of the women's team management, at the expense of sounding ignorant, unfortunately, that's not something that I'm a really good knowledge base of. So I don't want to dilute the importance there, but I agree it needs to be a really important pillar because Arsenal have always done well in that regard, and they've been innovators in terms of women's team, not just management, but in terms of platforming the women's team. So I think that's going to be important. And then lastly, in terms of high-end talent acquisition, we talked about it. That whole idea about a scouting network is going to be incredibly important, isn't it? And having a niche person, that's probably, yeah, the biggest thing that we need to look forward to kind of moving forward. So I'm just going to go to your super chats because I really appreciate them. So number one, Alejandro Taberco, thank you so much for your super chat. I really appreciate it. So you hate Edu. Joking. Yes, guys, Edu is the worst. That is exactly what I am saying. I hope we get the right guy. Yeah, mate, Alejandro. I hope we get a really good guy as well. I think we will. I'm confident in terms of us making a step forward, and actually, I'm hopeful. I'm really excited. I don't know about you guys. Personally, I think this is an awesome opportunity for us to take the club forward. You know, we haven't really had change in the backroom staff for a while, and I think this is important to keeping everybody on their toes. And so I think moving Garlick up to a managing director, having James King come back to us from the FA to handle contract negotiations, I think Vinay stepping out and having Juliet Slot handle commercial revenue, there's been a lot of change in the backroom staff. So personally, I'm excited. I'm excited about it. So let's see what we get going forward. And I'm sure we'll get some news about somebody coming in the next couple of months. So from McLovin, I still love that character. So excellent job there. Thank you for your super chat, mate. McLovin says, I think the new sporting director should build upon what Edu laid in terms of off the family culture, but add their own personality and network. Yeah, I completely agree. That was something that we were talking about earlier in the stream, in which I think the cultural reset that Edu was able to do was phenomenal. I think the cultural impact and the family atmosphere that he created for new players and recruitment is so important for us moving forward that I think I would be very disappointed if we didn't continue those things. So I completely agree with you. I think it's a brilliant. And lastly, from Bram, well, thank you for becoming a YouTube member. Really appreciate it. Hope you enjoy the content, and we hope to keep earning your support. So yes, guys, we'll jump back to kind of some last minute questions if we might have. So make sure, I probably could take a couple more. So if you have any more questions, make sure you guys pop it into the chat, and then we'll sign off for a bit. But thank you again for all of your support, guys. Appreciate all of you guys being here. And I know it's a little bit nerve-wracking for me hosting a live, but I hope you guys have enjoyed the content thus far. I do think that moving forward, right, and what we define as successful or not, I think we need to look at what has made other successful teams, and I think we need to make ourselves be different. And I would like us to be innovators. So I think one of the biggest things that we've seen right now is there's a lot of people that have moved on, right? Jack Wilshere, Dan Machichi, Kevin Betsy, all of these guys that have moved on from a youth sense. Then afterwards, I think when you have a look at it now, Edu, he's moving on to another project. I think Arsenal have been a brilliant destination for developing talent off the pitch as well, not just on the pitch. And I think that's a really important thing for a club. People must view us as a destination to improve. And I think there's been a lot of really brilliant times where you have a look at it and people have gone on to get higher level positions. And so you're looking at it as a place of development, aren't you? So if you're a really new, exciting kind of sporting director in that mold, if you're a new, exciting mind, I think you look at Arsenal as a place of growth. And I think you look at Arsenal as a place of safety in terms of I can trust my development with them. And I think that's huge. I don't think that should be underplayed. I really don't. Because I think when you have a look at it, I think that's just a brilliant method of making sure that you get the best talent. They need to see themselves as being able to grow with you, don't they? And if they don't trust that, if they don't trust the environment, the support, they don't trust the culture, then they won't come. So I think for the most part, we've done a brilliant job about facilitating that next step for people. And I think we just need to make sure that our next step is going to be a really, really good one. So, and once again, Alejandro Tiburcio, thank you again for gifting another 5 Canon podcast memberships. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I hope everybody enjoys it. So thank you so much. So from Andrea, sorry, I'm really bad at this, but Andrea Bergeris, sorry if I butchered your name, mate, but would you want an experienced director that has no connection to the club, or an up-and-coming former player that has connection to the club to become a director of football? Okay, interesting one. For me, an experienced director, I think, has to be the key. I think one thing is I don't want somebody that's got no experience. I think at this point, I'm at a level in which Arsenal have done such a brilliant job getting themselves to a level to compete. I think to win and become a dominant era, we need somebody with some know-how. I'd like personally some experience in the job. I don't think it has to have connection. And I also don't look bad upon former players either. My one thing that I would personally question is I'm not a fan of recruiting past regimes to fix current problems. So for me, they can have a connection to the club, but I would have hoped that they did their own journey. I personally don't agree with this idea that we need to recruit people from the past to fix our future. I think that we need a new voice. I think there's new ways of thinking. And I think you limit your network if you only think about it in that sense. I think it's a fan-led thing, right? Like, don't we automatically support people that are one of our own? So from that sense, you'll definitely support it. But I personally wouldn't look for it in terms of it being a requirement for the next kind of sporting director or director of football, whatever kind of role this might be. So yeah, and I think that when you have a look at kind of, I really like this comment about the corporate world. I mean, people always move on for more money, more job titles, more power. I mean, ultimately, this is a job, isn't it? And so a lot of people will look to build themselves as a name for that. The one thing that I would say is that's not always a bad thing. I think you need healthy competition to make sure that you stay at the top. So I think Arsenal need this. They do. And I think this is going to be a really important crossroads for us in terms of who we pick to lead us forward. I think says a lot about how much we trust in this club's idea of being sustainable. And I think one thing that Edu gave us was a level of consistent stability. So I'd like that to be maintained. I don't think I'd like major chopping and changing, but I do think every 4 or 5 years, you need a rebuild, don't you? And you need new people around you. I think one of the biggest things is that if we get too comfortable with ourselves and we get too comfortable with the idea of doing the same thing. And I think comfortability is not good for you in life at all. The minute you get comfortable, you should be challenged. You should be getting out there, trying to change who you are as a person and trying to improve yourself. Otherwise, you stay stagnant. And that's, I think, the enemy of football, really, and life. So a little bit of life advice there. So we'll end on a question from Imadine. Apparently, Arteta has a lot of influence in everything. Do you think that's the right way to do things? Interesting. Okay, number one, I think a manager must have power in the backroom staff. I think it's pretty ridiculous to separate a manager from power. And I think when you have somebody like Mikel, who's a visionary, they need to have their hand in a lot of pots. The one thing that I think you do need, though, is you need a co-captain to this. And you need to have, there's a risk about giving all of the power. And, I think when you have a manager like Mikel, it makes sense for him to have the power that he's got. But one thing that you do absolutely need is you can't give him complete freedom to do what he feels is right. I think nobody deserves that power, by the way. I think there's nobody in this club, past, present, or future, that deserves complete power. It's not correct. It's not a way to run a successful business. Successful businesses are ran on teams of really talented individuals, and people that, by the way, disagree. I, for example, in my pursuit of trying to learn about football a little bit more and trying to help hopefully share that journey with all of you guys, is number one, we need to have disagreement. That's why I love when people come on here and start to put comments about maybe I don't agree with your opinion this way, because I think as soon as we start having an echo chamber of you're right, this is great, then you end up being complacent. You stop looking to improve, and that's not good. So from my perspective, absolutely it's bad for Mikel to have an influence in everything. I think it's bad for him to have complete autonomy, but I have no problem with him having major influence and major decisions. I mean, he's a smart guy who's done incredible things for our club. Of course, he's going to have a major influence of it. But I do think that we need to make sure that somebody is powerful enough to question Mikel. That's important. If you don't have somebody that feels that they can question Mikel, and Mikel doesn't respect to heed the advice that he's getting, that's a major problem. So for me, that's really important that we must have. So yeah, so guys, again, thank you so much for everything. I know this was a bit of an impromptu live. I hope you guys appreciated the content. I think ultimately, when we have a look at this, this is exciting news. I think there was a lot of great things that Edu has given us, a ton of great things. You can't discount that. The culture that he's been able to produce in the club has been excellent. The family atmosphere that he's been able to translate to both targets and members of staff is completely incredible. And the stability that he offered in his tenure, never really creating strife or major controversy, are all three things that I think we really need to translate into our new role. Points of improvement, I'm not going to say criticism, but points of improvement that we can look for in the new person could be developing a new scouting network niche. I think that's very important. Personally, I would like us to become kings of our own backyard, South London, the UK. I really like that as a talent bed. I think it's important. Why look for talent elsewhere when in the backyard you have some of the best talent? So for me, but it doesn't have to be the UK. I would just like a kind of scouting network niche that I think we could attribute to our new sporting director. I would love us to continue last year's sale, and I think we need to see better sample of that. I really don't feel that we've seen enough sample of that over the years, so I think that's a point of improvement as well. And I think lastly, I will say is that I think that we really need to improve our connection to the fans. I would like a sporting director that I think talks and has ambitions and is able to create a vision and talk to us about that vision, communicate that to us, be a figure that we can look towards and learn a little bit again. And I want them to have their own idea of the club. So from my perspective, those are the three things that I would look to a point of improvement on. And so as we kind of tie out this kind of little segment on an education, I think, guys, this is an exciting time. It's unknown waters. So I understand people maybe be having some form of trepidation, but I will say, I think this is a good thing. This is a good thing for Arsenal. It's a great thing for Mikel. I don't think that Mikel can continue to be the only voice in the room. I think he needs somebody that he respects. And I hope that we find somebody that he does respect, that works in tandem to question him, to give him some ideas. And I think that this is a really important time for Arsenal. James King coming back from the FA to handle contract negotiations means that Richard Garlick is moving up in terms of the hierarchy. New voices. I know we have Tim Lewis from the background staff. We need somebody that's another pillar. I think in terms of looking overall, we've done a brilliant job about improving our commercial revenue. So I think Juliet Slot deserves a lot of praise in that sense. Per Mertesacker has handled the youth development in that entire pillar brilliantly. So I think that's a check mark. I think Mikel, we need to go on to win, but I think he's done a brilliant job on the pitch. The last pillar now is something that we need a real successful appointment for. So I think it could be something that is brilliant, to be honest with you. So guys, thank you so much for sticking with us. Thank you so much for joining. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed the content. And thank you for all our new members that joined today. I really appreciate it. Oh, brilliant. Before we go, we got another super chat. So I'm just going to make sure I do that. Dane Hayworth, thank you for your super chat, mate. I did a thought process. 30% of his signings were excellent. 30% were good. 20% were average. 20% were poor. Yeah, I think so from a 60-40 sense. I mean, overall, his signings were pretty good. And I think earlier on in the podcast, we had kind of rated him. I gave him a 7. I think the consensus was about a 6. So I think he's done the minimum baseline for what a good sporting director can do. But there's certainly room for growth. And I don't think that we should deny that. So I'm excited to see where the new direction of Arsenal goes. But again, guys, thank you so much for sticking with us. I hope that you guys enjoyed the content. If you did, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. If you guys do like the content, you can pop over on Patreon as well and have a little bit of a look for a 7-day free trial. We've got a lot of exciting stuff coming up. I've got a youth pod coming up for you guys with Will that we're going to be recording soon. So we're going to have that for you this week. We're going to have the IR on Wednesday. We're going to have TCP live on Thursday. So the content machine keeps on rolling. So we hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you guys for all of your help, all your support, all your wonderful comments. And thanks for keeping it Arsenal.